Welcome in, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this edition of the 42Q Partner Connect webinar series. So this is actually going to be a two-part series we're doing with one of our partners. So today we are going to be bringing in our partner On Time Edge, and Brian Vogel is going to be talking with us. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about Cloud MES and why it's the keystone of a scalable digital manufacturing strategy. So we're going to go a little bit about that, and then we'll be doing another webinar with On Time Edge, I believe in November. So be looking for invites for that coming out as well. So as we're going through the webinar today, if you have any questions, at the bottom of the Zoom window, there's that Q&A button. If you click that, this window will pop up. You can post any questions that you have during the webinar, and then at the end, we will have some time to address all those questions there. Also, if you're having trouble hearing the audio or anything like that, there's also a chat option. You can send me a chat, and I'll try to walk you through if you're having any issues there. All right, so we're going to go through and do some introductions so you can know who you're hearing from today, the panelists that you're going to be hearing from during the webinar. Then a big part of this webinar is going to be covering a case study that we did with one of our customers and talking about the challenges they had when they came to us and kind of the benefits they saw from using a cloud MES. Then we're going to go through and talk about a couple of different implementation strategies and kind of some best practices for how to think through that. And then some adoption and change management. So understanding when you're starting this journey of looking for an MES or doing your digital transformation, kind of how is that going to look and what can you expect? So we'll be able to hear from Zoltan and Brian on some things to expect when you're going through that journey. And then, as I mentioned at the end, we'll have some time for Q&A. So any questions that you post, we'll address those at the end of the webinar. All right, so here's your panelists today. So myself, I am Bobby Hanna. I'm the training and technical writing manager here at 42Q. So my job is to make sure that our customers, our partners, everybody else understands how to use our product. They understand the benefits that they can get from it, and they can see that value. So my job is to kind of do all of our training, all of our help material, all these webinars to kind of get that message out there. So with us from 42Q is Zoltan Horvath, who is our customer success manager. So Zoltan, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Zoltan Horvath. I'm located in Central Europe. I joined 42Q team a little bit more than a year ago. I'm responsible for customer success. Prior to that, I had more than 25 years in manufacturing environment. Out of those, 15 plus years in management, mainly responsible for supply chain and for operations production itself.
Thanks, Zoltan. And from On Time Edge, we have Brian Vogel. So Brian, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brian Vogel, and I'm responsible for commercial operations with On Time Edge. I spent the totality of my 30 plus year career in shop floor optimization from a people, process, and technology. Two-thirds of that was solely focused on the data integrations in and around processes that you would typically find within the manufacturing execution system.
Thanks, Brian. And just a little bit more information for those of you who may be familiar with 42Q, but not with On Time Edge. So, we're at 42Q, we're an MES and we handle things in that space. But On Time Edge, they're one of our implementation partners, so they handle things outside of that. It's industry wide, so they can kind of help in a lot of different areas outside of just MES. So, I want to kind of mention that too, as well as some things that you can get with On Time Edge about. All right, so we're going to, again, spend a lot of time talking about a case study with one of our customers, We're here. But before we dive into the case study, so I kind of want to start with you, Brian. If you can kind of quickly explain why using Cloud MES is a great entry point for these manufacturers that are looking for a digital strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the barriers of entry for MES has always been its monolithic nature as well as its database structure. It's a very elongated process. There's, typical requirements, and then there's recipe design, and then you figure out what modules you start to integrate. And it takes a very long time from a time to value perspective. Conversely, with a cloud strategy, you can literally in days, if not weeks, enable different functions from weigh and dispense to packaging through production and waive a lot of the technology limitations and barriers that typically probably would face you would be faced with. So when you look at the time to value, you look at the flexibility, but most importantly, the extensibility. How do you prioritize value very early? How do you pivot towards that and everything you do become foundationally buildable from one step to the next or one phase to the next? And cloud, particularly the design of 42Q within a cloud setting enables those things.
Right. And you guys are going to hear a lot during this webinar about us talking about that, about it, being able to scale and, start small and then build up. So there's a lot of advantages for going with cloud versus, a huge package of an on-site system. So we'll cover that a little bit more, but you're going to hear that throughout this webinar here. Okay. So Zoltan, over to you. So talking about the specific customer, so Weir came to us, a big global manufacturer. So can you kind of talk a little bit about what Weir does and what their facilities are like?
Yeah, sure. Weir Minerals is producing heavy-duty equipment for mainly for mining and sand and aggregates industries. They are producing their own raw material or their own parts as well. So they have a very big vertical integration in their operation. And what they are doing right now, they have rubber shop. This is for rubber parts, highly durable rubber products, foundry for all their die-cast parts. They do their die-cast parts on their own. They have their machine shops where they turn the raw material to parts and components. And then they have the assembly where they assemble the final products, those mining equipments, what they have. Currently, Weir is a global company. They have factories all over the world, but they did not have a standardized solution, standardized MES solution. So each factory had their own developed solution. Even ERP systems were different by the time of the starting of the implantations.
What were some of the, you remember some of the main problems they were facing when they came to us? So what were some of the main pain points?
Yeah, the problems they had is they had only paper-based solutions for traceability. There were no real on-time visibility on their production status and the quality status. So due to those things, they had a lot of quality issues, a very low throughput of the production, relatively high scrap rate and high WIP value, which was resulting a very high cost of ownership. So what they wanted to achieve is to have a real-time visibility and force through things. Even though they had pretty good and well-designed processes, all those were not system-based, and all the information was paper-based. The quality checks were done on lot basis. So if they had a failure in any of the lot of the components, they had to rescreen the upper level assemblies, or they had to block a lot of products on their shop floor. So they wanted to have some real-time visibility and a standardized solution.
And Brian, when we look at these complex high mix manufacturers, some of these problems with quality, lack of traceability, are these some typical problems you're seeing across kind of companies industry wide?
No, absolutely. I think you think about consumer goods where you have, a high velocity and in some instances packaging, challenges, particularly around sodas and fluids and things like that. But when you look at Weir, although their scale is slightly different because they're a large company, they're not indifferent than any manufacturer, that are getting their components and materials from partners. And when you start to look through traceabilities, whether that be solely based on the product genealogy or the actual process genealogy, when you look at the time that it takes to produce something versus the quality holds, oftentimes quality holds exceed that of the production cycle. So, very much, consistent with the problems that Weir has laid out that Zoltan kind of described is the same whether you're a CPG manufacturer or a true process-based manufacturer or even in the life sciences, albeit slightly different from a regulatory and data capture perspective. The underlying processes and the challenges related to quality, line of sight, throughput, and ultimately on-time delivery. The ask for fill rates are very, very consistent.
Are there any other kind of problems that you've seen out there in the industry with the complex high mix manufacturing? Anything, that's maybe a little bit different than we were seeing, but kind of common problems?
Yeah, I mean, when you fix throughput, invariably it backloads into packaging. Packaging then backloads into shipping. So when you start to think through, some of the problems that are, unintended, it's those types of, implications, secondary or tertiary, that you have to start thinking about. And then that will help you on the front end structure your agreements differently, because now you have an opportunity to have a higher rate of fidelity on the accuracy of when you ask for something, when it's going to be fulfilled. When you're using, tools that 42Q brings to bear, you have real-time enablement of quality. So your quality holds are going to be shrink exponentially. And then ultimately your routing sequence for packaging can be ultimately streamlined, because you know where these variations are coming in. So different weights, different bottles, and things that would typically, raise, challenges. Now, correspondingly, outbound to your customers, you now can, and you can now, or even into, distribution, you now have a much different way of forecasting, which ultimately drives a much higher rate of ROI.
No, absolutely. Thanks, Brian.
Mhm.
All right, Zoltan, getting back to Weir. So when they started this launch and decided to go down this road, where did they decide to put the MES? What was the reasoning behind picking that facility, that line to kind of start with?
Okay, they started back in 2019 in Salt Lake City. That is a rubber shop, and that's still a rubber shop factory. The reason they picked this one, they had pretty well-designed processes and relatively okay quality yields, but very high VIP value. And this plant and the product itself is the lowest level of their vertical integration. Most of the production is built to stock, not built to order. So the risk of implementing any new system, the risk of having a downtime or production stop or supply chain issues by implementing a new system was relatively low. So that's why they've been choosing this rubber shop factory back in 2019.
And I know that there's different strategies behind doing this. With Weird, it's either picking like a line that's already doing good and starting there and making that your template, or you might want to start with maybe one of your problem areas. So, Brian, I know the big thing is this digital strategy, digital transformation. So kind of when manufacturers are working towards that, how do they kind of know where to zero in on where to start?
It's kind of interesting. I think that something that Zoltan said around having a pretty standardized process, that actually speaks to me about one of the, three legs of the stool that make a project successful, and that is the change management aspect. Oftentimes, to the heart of your question, when you're looking for ROI, it's very easy to say, "Hey, this is my biggest problem. It's costing me the most money." But when you take a step back and you start understanding why that problem is happening, what are the dependencies? Is it, are you capable of implementing a change that your team is going to actually maximize and get the returns from? And then ultimately, are there any underlying dependencies from corresponding technologies or data that you need to have in foundationally in order to get to the outcomes you're looking for? So when you start looking through, the process of upfront, our collective, skills match very well in terms of your accelerated adoption, framework, and how what we typically do is we build out a process flow from, the product release or ingredient coming in from a quality, inspection through a finished good. And along that, it's not just the processes of following. You're looking for, what are the people connections, what are the corresponding technologies, what are the areas that are manual, and then ultimately you're building out what are the integrations that would be necessary, and then you build together a digital strategy that allows you very much to crawl, walk, run, but with each of those gates have the requisite return on your investment that allows you to continue on that investment, but most importantly, allows you to expand and create that change management early often principles that your end users, your shop floor operations are actually pulling this solution in as opposed to pushing it on them. Two totally different ways to go about a project. And when you have a rich environment, the way that Zoltan described within the rubber, that's certainly great. But if not, you have to account for that up front in terms of how you frame out your adoption curve and ultimately the ROI that you would realize.
Yeah, and it's one of those things when you're talking about that, Brian, and it's if you look at it as, okay, we need to digitally transform everything, that is a huge thing to think about and undertake. Whereas if you think, okay, we want to digitally transform this one thing, we want to take this one step, hit that, and then move on from there. That's a lot easier to achieve and a lot better results that you're going to get out of that and a lot better adoption and things like that. Whereas starting with those small chunks than just trying to take on and think about everything as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that brings up a parallel project that we're doing with a very old and mature manufacturer where they, was very much in the same situation where you have different, parts from different companies that you've acquired or bought at different times and different ERP systems. But when you start with a digital strategy and you prioritize your build and adoption curve around your infrastructure to meet your team where they're at, but give them the tools to grow and ultimately drive the outcomes for your business, that is a very, very solid way to go about any type of change, notwithstanding a digital transformation.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So moving on, we talked a little bit about the issues Weirs was seeing when they came to us and kind of their plan for starting out with this. But Zoltan, do you want to kind of talk about some of the things they achieved with this initial rollout?
Yeah, they had a lot of good things out of those. So first of all, they were able to fine tune and lean their processes to have develop a blueprint of configuration. What might be became standard, and later on it became standard for the VR factories. But for the plant itself, lowering cost of ownership and increased quality yields was a very big achievement for them. So the best thing what they had there as a global company is gaining experience in digital factory setup, and they had a proof of concept, and they were able to standardize their solutions for all the other factories.
During this process, how involved was the shop floor team, and how did they train the company up on how to use this?
Yeah, the involvement of the people in on the shop floor was really an early involvement. So prior to implementing a system, there was a pretty good change management. So the first thing was that they highlighted the need for change. So once it was obvious that they need to change something to get better results, everyone on the shop floor even was really involved into the project. So what they have done, they selected plant champions uh, who were good professionals, understanding each process steps the best, and they were nominated as plant champions. They were trained as part of the initial training, and the rest of the employees were trained by the trainers. So the adaptation was much better than having someone else going there and implementing a system. They had the core team, and the core team did the implementation itself and did the training for the users and the shop floor personnel. So the adaptation was pretty well designed and pretty well prepared there.
Brian, over to you. So I know this is not just an MES thing, but it's a software thing, period, where these systems that get implemented to try to bring about change a lot of times are at risk to become shelfware or not be used properly and not see the value. And so what's the best way to get the workforce involved with the transformation when you're going down this road?
So I think there's been a couple of reoccurring themes when we talk about change management, and Zoltan talked about having, a very qualified team, at the rubber plant, and to the point of the train the trainers. When you get teams involved early and often, what you're doing is twofold. One, you're getting a perspective from the shop floor of the areas that are very frustrating, time consuming, manual, and ultimately largely likely responsible for a lot of the quality issues. So when you start walking through, hey, how this goes from a certain amount of hours on paperwork a day to maybe minutes or not at all, there's a value equation that's immediately realized. When you look at the frustrations of trying to find a material or walking out to get a real read on what's happening on a piece of machinery, and now all of a sudden that becomes a click or a scan, the shop floor immediately starts to understand that there is real value here, and that they're going to actually be able to fulfill and hit the throughput goals and at the accuracy that they're that is intended. No one wants to go into a shop floor and not hit the daily goals. And when you look in removing the barriers that often stop that from happening, it's really frequently met with a, hey, I'm excited about this. And then quite frankly, when you start looking at traditional designs or recipe or workflow creation, having their engagement and that domain expertise, that process, that intimate process knowledge, could ultimately drive efficiencies that now really, when you start seeing that on a daily basis, the workforce actually has skin in the game, and that's a really big outlier to ensure. Now, back to why that's super critical in terms of not having shelfware, because now that they've influenced the outcome, there's a second aspect of it. If you look at throughput, absolutely, one of the linchpins for productivity contribution. Reducing WIP has a significant impact on cash quality. Not only do you save money, you can get a higher fidelity of outcome, but then you start looking at asset utilization and extending that by 2-3 years. You look at your cost of integrations plummeting because of the connectivity that comes out of the box. There's all these rates of return and problem resolutions that come from a technology framework such as 42Q that ultimately make it an essential component of any shop floor operator's life. And when you go back weeks or months later, it's clear that they're bought in because of the efficiencies that it meant to them individually and the outcomes to the company.
Yeah, that's one of the things that we definitely focus on, is around, everything comes down to the operator interface, really, because that's where all the information is gathered. If you make it too difficult, the operator's not going to do it. That's just human nature. So that is, to what you're speaking about, that's one of the places that we focus on, is making the operator interface as easy as possible for the operator to use. Our ultimate goal is that they don't think about our product. Really, they should be doing their job, and our product for gathering the data should be an afterthought. Like, they shouldn't really have to focus on that. So that's kind of our goal with that. So Zoltan, these results that we're seeing, is this kind of consistent with what we're seeing from our other customers?
Yes, absolutely. That's absolutely in line with the experience we have with other customers and the benefits other customers had. So most of our customers went on the same path to have the system implementation. First, they realized that there are some KPIs which needs to be changed, and with the current methodology, it cannot be changed. So they need more online visibility, and as a result, everywhere what we are facing is reduced scrap, improved labor efficiency, improved machine efficiency, improved all those key metrics impacting the shop floor. So that's absolutely consistent, and we have the more or less the same results at all of our customer side.
Thanks, Zoltan. All right, so Brian, over to you. So when we talk about an implementation strategy, a phased approach versus an all-in-one, can you kind of talk about, why the phased approach it works out a lot better for this company?
Absolutely. I mean, look, anytime you're taking capital and investing in a technology, you have to measure how it's going to impact your business, and more importantly, how sustainable, and how does that over time continue to grow, almost like a reverse hockey stick. And when you're looking at traditional MES or an on-site installation, typically speaking, you're in a year's equation from the moment you start to the moment you go live. When you look at, the phased approach for, a cloud offering, it allows you to pick and choose, what are the paths to the quickest value, but most sustained valuable. And as I said earlier, foundation allows you to get to the next phase even quicker. So when you look where our orders typically begin, whether that be in just a product release or to a weigh and dispense or to a kitting, that front end from ERP into 42Q, automating that, getting the materials, ready for consumption, whether they're labeled, whether it's a, folder, depending on your integrations up front. That right there sets up the higher stage. Now you could start speaking about, do I want to tackle the totality of my production floor, or do I want to go after a specific product portfolio? When you have a cloud-enabled framework and a modularity that 42Q has built over years and years of experience, it allows you to pivot to the value that you need, solve the business problem while setting the stage for rates of return and growth and buy-in to ultimately go to all areas of your business. And that approach is ultimately tied to what we talked about initially is when you start to do your digital strategy, you have to look at where you're at, and the technology and the adoption curve have to meet you there, but also give you the path to get to the next gate. And when we lay that out, the phased approach becomes very manageable, not disruptive to your culture, but the impacts certainly are measured in a way that allow you to make data-driven decisions that allow you then to talk to, hey, this original plan had us going from weighing dispense to packaging, but we've got such a rate of return, we're going to pivot and go to production, but we're going to go to this particular segment. This is the flexibility you're looking for as a business to go where your value is and where you can get competitive differentiation or improve your quality, therefore improving your relationship with your end consumer.
Okay. And I want to talk a little bit about kind of the length of time for these rollouts, but we got a couple more slides. I'm going to cover that. We'll talk a little bit about that at the end, kind of the length people can expect with this. So when we kind of look at the cloud MES as a whole, it's again, we're talking about phased approaches with starting small and then building out. This is a whole suite of things that you can get from this. So Zoltan, do you want to talk a little bit about, kind of why cloud MES is particularly good when we're talking about this phased approach?
Yes, absolutely. So the cloud MES, the main advantages of that one is that from cost perspective, it eliminates customer servers. So the investment, one-time investment is relatively small, and you have a predictable cost at the beginning already. And the cloud makes it available that you will have a global visibility from anywhere on your factory data. You don't have to go through VPN. You don't have to connect directly to the plant servers. You can have all the data available from anywhere on the world. On the other hand, from security, and that's an important point, on the security, IT security part is provided along with the tool. So 42Q is responsible for the security, and we have good tools to ensure all security requirements are met. And the third point I wanted to mention is this modular thing and scalability thing. So you can start small, and you can pick and choose whatever functionality is really required for your production. You don't have to install and implement all in one as a big package, but you can build up your own implementation, starting with the essentials, and then extend the functionalities, extend the usage of the functionalities as per your requirements.
And Brian, again, looking at this, if somebody's looking at this initially, searching for an MES, this is kind of overwhelming looking at this. How do they kind of narrow down where to start when they're talking about functionality, things they're looking at? Kind of what's the best way to look at that?
So I think it starts with, knowing what your problem is and, doing the assessment up front. We're not talking months. There's like a week of, of discovery that very quickly can not only determine what the underlying challenge is, what the financial implication is of correcting that. Then from that, it allows you to solution which of these modules make the most sense to start with to solve that problem. And then it goes through that dependency and adoption curve. So when you looking for a starting point, there's a rapid process that we've collaborated on that allows you get to an actual outcome in under 3 months where you actually have an implemented system. That all backtracks to that front end assessment to determine the value equation and, again, meeting you where you're at so that you could then build out a structured path to ultimately get to a fully digital or fully autonomous or, the best, highest quality you could potentially, get out of your environments. So typically starts with the upfront assessment and then make the decisions from there.
So we look at the kind of the best practices for the fast results. So kind of a typical strategy that you can look forward to when you're looking at implementing this. And so, you selected an MES, okay, what can you expect now? And, Brian, we talked a little bit earlier about kind of the length people can expect this. You've mentioned the 3 months, they can have things off the ground. So do you want to kind of talk a little bit more about, all right, kind of how do they start? All right. So, we've decided to go down this road. All right, what's our next steps?
So I think immediately, without number one, everything else to the right of it becomes, at the end of the day, not as effective. So having a phone call, discussing the challenges, coming out, walking the floor, talking through, where you're at, where you're trying to get to, tying out, and mapping the current infrastructure, i.e. what systems do you have? An ERP system? Do you not? Do you have a quality system? Do you have a CAPA system? Whatever that may be. And if not, you map that out. And then ultimately that allows us in very short order to talk about number two, which is the solution, what you should be adopting in order to meet those challenges, prioritizing based on the financial returns, and then ultimately implementation and super user training become a byproduct of that. So, to the point we said earlier, we could have modules installed in, 12 weeks. You could have a full MES in under a year, but the devil is always in the detail, and that detail comes from phase one. That is the requirements gathering workshop, and that's something that we would love to, expand on, and we could talk a little bit offline if you like, and follow up with more detail.
Yeah, and we talked a little bit about the length of this. I know you mentioned the 3-month thing. I know for our accelerator packages, it's like you mentioned, 3 months. So we've got 30-day, the requirements gathering, implementation, and then 60 days validation. So again, we're looking at a very fast turnaround with this. So
Absolutely. And I think it's consistent with the underlying fact of how flexible and extensible 42Q's system and framework of modules are.
Absolutely. All right. So, if you want to learn more about On-Time Edge, again, 42Q, the MES side of this, we work with On-Time Edge, but again, On-Time Edge, they handle a lot of the other systems in the manufacturing area. So, working on interconnecting things and, anything that you're having problems with, you can contact them to find out more about that. So, Brian, you want to talk a little bit more about what you guys do before we drop off here?
Absolutely. I mean, we have, 3 core practices. We have, first and foremost, a data strategy. So, understanding shop floor operations from a data centricity and ultimately how the data needs to integrate so that you make it ubiquitous. And what does that mean? Persona driven use. Who needs it? Why do they need it? And in the format that they need it. Second to that is that we have the world's largest supply chain scheduling and planning practice with hundreds and hundreds of implementations. And then ultimately, from an MES perspective, we've got between the top 5 people in the practice, nearly 100 years of experience with manufacturing systems. So collectively, we're really grounded solely on the whole entire production sequence from design to fulfillment and even into the last mile.
Great. And there's a QR code there. And also we will be sharing out these the slides and everything, so you'll be able to access that QR code there as well. So here's all of our contact information, everybody you heard from today. So I want to thank Zoltan from joining us from 42Q from our side, and then also thank Brian from On-Time Edge for joining us. I apologize, we went over a few minutes here, but we wanted to make sure we got through all the information. So we'll hang out here for a few minutes if anyone's got any questions. So we did have one question posted here, and that is, so what ERP systems does 42Q integrate with? So we have pre-built connectors for Oracle, NetSuite, and SAP, but we also have what's called our Exchange API, which allows us to communicate with any kind of ERP that's out there. So for, sending through transactions, WIP transactions, sending in through the BOM information, all that kind of, we can work with any of those different ERP systems that are out there. Brian, I don't know, do you want to add anything to that about ERP integration or anything like that you guys see?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, there's effectively about a half a dozen routes, the material, the machine, the route, maybe some SOPs. And, when you look at the framework of 42Q, it's super well defined. And as you said, with the SDK kit, whether you're talking to a middleware, a XI interface, or some type of XML web service, it's a pretty standard protocol to ensure not only you're ingesting them, but all the corresponding goods produced, goods received, quality consumed, right back so you would typically see to ERP.
Thanks, Brian. And we did get somebody asking if we're going to share out the recording. Yes. So everyone that attended, you will get an email that's going to have a link to the recording and a link to download a PDF of the slides that we covered. We will also be sharing out links to this. If you follow On Time Edge or 42Q on LinkedIn, we will be posting information about this on there as well for you to be able to access it. So if we don't have anything else, thank you everyone for joining, and thank you again, Zoltan and Brian, for doing this webinar with me today. And again, we will be doing another webinar with On Time Edge later on this year, I believe in November. I think our intent right now is to kind of focus a little bit more on the medical manufacturing aspect for that one, so be looking for invites being shared out for that. So thank you everyone again, and have a great day.
Thank you for having me. Afternoon, guys.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye-bye.